Okay, so let's talk about David Hume. Mr. Hume was a philosopher in the 1700s. Unlike other philosophers, I should mention, that we've studied so far, such as Descartes, there's nobody around that thinks that Descartes is right about everything. There are quite a few people that actually still subscribe to David Hume's philosophy. He is an empiricist like Locke. He's also an agnostic, in the religious sense. So he is not a theist. He doesn't believe that God exists necessarily. Well, he doesn't necessarily think God does not exist. Just that he wants proof God does exist. So, which matches very much with his skepticism. He is a skeptic in general about philosophy. Okay, so let's see. David Hume, very important philosopher. Like I said, he's an empiricist like Locke. The only thing about this, though, is David Hume is much, much more sophisticated than Locke. And his arguments are way more complicated than subtle. So I'm going to try to do my best to try to explain what David Hume is up to here. At the beginning of his writing, it does sound very much like Locke. I mean, he is arguing that, if you're blind, you wouldn't know what color looks like. A lot of this stuff sounds very much like Locke. I should also note, by the way, that he's writing at a later time. This is science is taking off at this point. I mean, this is after Newton, which is a huge thing. Newton changed the whole landscape of our understanding of science. I mean, people thought that maybe it was a good idea. I don't know. They're toying around with, oh, maybe this science thing is interesting, and then Newton came around and wrote his principles, and everybody just went great. They're like, that's it. We got the answer. I mean, it was an earthquake when Newton wrote his works, and David Hume was working after this. So now the scientific revolution is very much in play. I mean, it's happening now. It's also during the Enlightenment period in Europe, where people were questioning social and political norms. So just the climate has changed a bit. So just notice, like I said, sometimes a little historical context is you need a little bit of that. He wants to show the limits of human understanding against rationalist claims in particular. Now, this is something I should definitely note. Before David Hume, there were a lot of famous rationalists. And like I mentioned last time, the empiricists and the rationalists were fighting it out for decades and decades and decades and decades. After Hume, not so much. The guy buried, put it that way, rationalism. Like I said, there's hardly a rationalist around. I don't think there's any. And that's very much owing to David Hume. So, that's a big deal. I mean, he really, he ended that debate by all accounts. We'll talk about Kant soon, who's also pretty complicated and intricate, but it's not rationalism. And so anyway, he's an empiricist. All ideas come from experience. I'm not going to write that down again. That is what empiricism is. All ideas come from experience. We saw that with Locke, right? But unlike Locke, he has a different idea of how this happens. Locke had ideas of sensation and ideas of reflection. Hume has a different way of thinking about it, and his distinction here is between ideas and impressions. So he thinks there are these things, he calls them impressions. This is a technical term. He made it up. I mean, it's not what you usually think of as impressions, but for Hume, an impression is an immediate experience. And as an empiricist, that means it's based on your senses, sights, sounds, smells, tastes, feels. It's a kind of made up word, but also, what he calls passions, which are kind of like feelings, pain, pleasure, love, hate, those kinds of things. Those impressions and passions are your immediate experiences. He's an empiricist. Everything's based on these things, impressions and passions. Then from those impressions and passions, we form ideas. All right. So ideas are like secondary here. And therefore, they're more cloudy. They're more prone to error, in his words. If we want to really understand where our knowledge comes from, it's very much about epistemology. We need to trace things back to our immediate experiences. Where did we get the ideas from in the first place? They are more reliable and concrete, as he puts it. All right, so this is really kind of important, though, because Hume does this over and over and over again in his writing. He's like, I have this idea. Where did the idea come from? Well, let's trace it back to the immediate experiences that might have given me this idea. Where did it come from? Where did it actually originate? It has to be in immediate experience. Very empiricist, but also, a lot more technical, I don't know, precise than Locke, when he just throws out things like existence comes from experience and doesn't explain how. Hume goes into a lot more detail about this. Now, so notice that thing. This is called the copy principle by some philosophers, a lot of philosophers. All ideas are copied from experience. We got to go back to the impressions, which is the immediate experiences, whether they be internal or external. Sorry, my throat's drying out a little bit here. Okay. Now, I just quickly note that he doesn't think all thinking comes from reasoning, because he has this discussion of association of ideas, which, by the way, he didn't necessarily come up with. He's stealing some of this from Leibniz, who I'm skipping, but and it's in the, you can read Leibniz if you wish, it's in the readings, but even here Hume has a more subtle and well thought out version of what association of ideas is. But essentially, we're not always reasoning. People aren't always reasoning. Probably a good thing to point out. People didn't necessarily grasp that. Like people like Aristotle, for instance, it doesn't appear that they grasp that in a straightforward way. Most thinking is not reasoning. You're just associating one idea to another. All right, but back to philosophy, though. I mean, that's more of a psychological claim than a philosophical claim. If we go back to philosophy, we're about, philosophy is about knowledge, so it's about reason and understanding. And Hume doesn't deny that those things actually occur. I mean, there is reason and understanding, and he divides these up into two types of operations. There are relations of ideas, and these are necessary or contradictory, meaning they're always true or they're always false. And they include such things as mathematics and definitions. Hume seems to place a lot of emphasis on mathematics in particular, but there are other things. And by the way, etc. It's not just mathematics and definitions. Essentially, these are things that are just, they have to be true or they have to be false, and it's not based upon any experience that you're going to have. Now, matters of fact are contingent. These can be true or false. And the only way to find out whether they are true or false is to check out the world, reality. In other words, you have to have experience to know whether they're true or false. So, most cars in the parking lot of Mission College right now are Toyotas. True or false? The only way you're going to know that is if you go out in the parking lot and look around and find out, start counting the cars and find out whether, how many cars are Toyotas and how many cars are Fords and Hondas or whatever. You gotta go look. All right. So matters of fact are like this. They're contingent. You have to go out in the world and look around and find out whether it is true or false. Back to relations of ideas, what things aren't like that? That's the point of this. You don't have to go check because 2 + 2 is 4, period. You don't have to do any checking and experiments. It is. It's necessarily true that 2 + 2 is 4, period. That's it. Definitions. Bachelor is an unmarried male. That's a classic in philosophy. How many bachelors do you have to ask to find out whether they're married or not? None, because by definition, bachelors are unmarried males. So you don't have to do any checking. You don't have, in other words, it's not based upon experience. Most things that people know, that human beings know, are matters of fact. Okay, there's not math is actually a really important thing. It's in the relations of ideas category here, but when it comes down to it, most things people know are matters of fact. Okay, and those require checking. Now Hume's example here is telling. All right, it's actually a really this kind of just to push that point. The sun will rise tomorrow. You might think that's necessarily true. It's got to happen. The sun always comes up. It's true. But it's not necessarily true. It is not necessarily true that the sun is going to come up tomorrow. Something could happen. Look, the future is never known, so it can't be necessary. Some terrible event could occur and the sun doesn't come up tomorrow. It would be probably a pretty horrible thing. Yeah, that would probably be terrible. But it could happen. It is not necessary that the sun will rise tomorrow. It's contingent. Okay, that's what contingent means. It is possible that it won't happen. And anytime we don't know with certainty, it is contingent. Most things are contingent. Matters of fact are based on cause and effect reasoning is Hume's next assertion, which is absolutely plausible. Because if you think about how you understand the world, it is all cause and effect. Maybe you haven't really thought about this much, but hey, look, everything you do, you're trying to bring about some effect by some cause, right? Every action you take is to try to produce some effect. You eat because you're hungry. You get hungry. So what do you want to do? You want to get some food. You eat. Cause and effect. Or you're thirsty. So you drink. Cause and effect. You every movement you make in your car when you're driving. When you turn the wheel, you expect it to turn. When you press the brake, you expect it to slow down. When you press the gas, you expect it to... Every action you take is based upon cause and effect relationships in the world. It's how we get around. It's how we understand our whole reality. You know, we have to always be gauging causes and effects. Whenever something happens, you're always wanting to know what the cause is. Whenever you want to do something, you got to find out you got to kind of consider what the effect is and how you're going to accomplish that. Everything we do is cause and effect. So this is absolutely a plausible, reasonable claim by Hume that all matters of fact are based on causation. His example is if you find a watch on a deserted island, what do you know? Well, you know someone's been there because watches don't grow out of the earth. So you find the watch, and you know what causes watches to come into existence. So someone must have been on the island. That's his example. But if the more you think about this, you'll understand what I'm saying. Cause and effect is what governs the whole universe, really. All right. So how does cause and effect work? How do we, more specifically, actually, how do we understand cause and effect? That seems to be the next question, since almost everything we know is a matter of fact. And all matter of fact is based upon cause and effect. So if we're talking about knowledge, epistemology, we need to examine causation, cause and effect. How do we understand the relation of cause and effect? What do we know about it? This is the next pressing question for Hume. I'm going to stop this and talk about that in the next segment here.